everybody, Joe Workman here, and today I'm super excited to introduce you to Prince. And without further ado, let's dive into the demo. Now, Prince is a super elegant and simple gallery that is everything that you need. It serves all the basics. It does a great looking gallery. And true to its origins, the new version of Prince has this amazing hover effect that when you hover over, the images kind of randomly rotate in various directions. I think it's just a really nice effect. And if we go ahead and click on any of these images, you notice that we open up in a beautiful lightbox that is completely themable. So you can have full control over the background colors, the navigation colors, the borders, the shadows, all that. Now for navigation, you can go ahead and click on the navigation buttons. You can also swipe with both your trackpad or on touch. Now, not only that, but you can actually use your keyboard navigation as well. So you can use your arrows, or you can tab to the buttons and hit the enter key on the buttons, but you can use the left and right arrows to navigate super cleanly through the image gallery. Now let's dive into the other demo, just so we can kind of see what other styles we have available. Now here we have a more subtle, subdued hover effect, where we just have kind of a very small scale and kind of a bigger shadow. So it looks like the image is popping up a little bit, but we don't have really that kind of rotation going on. So if you want something much more simple and subtle for your site, we have that ability here as well. Now, one thing that's really important about this gallery here that we're looking at right now is look that we have a mixture of both portrait and landscape images, and both of them look great within the grid. Now, also notice that we have captions in here. By default, the alt tag from the images can be used as a caption. However, you can define a custom caption as well. Now let's go ahead and look at this demo. Here, when we open this, we'll notice that we have great custom navigation buttons, but we also have a caption at the bottom here. Now you can have a caption on the thumbnails or in the lightbox, and it doesn't need to be an and thing. They're controlled independently. So if you want them on the thumbnails, but not in the lightbox, or if you want them in the lightbox, but not in the thumbnail, that's not a problem. But one thing to also note is we have a beautiful blurred background. Not only do we have control over the actual color of our backdrop, but we can actually blur the background of the website so it really obscures the background and really makes our images pop. Now let's dive in to see how easy it is to implement Prince. Now this is the demo project that ships with Prince, so you have access to all of this that I'm showing you right now. Just as usual, we have a nice child interface so you can manually add in as many images as you want. Now you can drag and drop images with the Prince image stack, or you can use the Prince image URL to actually define warehoused images. And you can define both the thumbnail and the full image. Now, for performance reasons, only the thumbnails are loaded on page load, and the full scaled images are actually loaded very intelligently in the background. When you hover over images or as you're navigating through, it intelligently loads the images on the fly so that we have the most performant page possible. Now, if we look in here, we can also define the width and height of both the thumbnails and the full images, as well as define an alt tag. And here is where you would define your custom caption if you didn't want to use the alt tag as the caption. Now let's dive into the Prince stack. Now there are a lot of settings here, so let's go ahead and focus on them on a group by group basis. So the first setting group here is actually building out your grid, kind of the layout of your thumbnails and the grid. Now, by default, the captions are turned off. If you turn those on, you'll notice that there is another settings group here that shows up that has our caption colors, our caption sizes for small, medium, and large, and then whether or not you want to center those captions as well. Next up is we can define the minimum and maximum width and height for our images so that we can make sure that our images are sized and we can create the grid that we want. Now we can define the sizes for small, medium, and large. And the height settings are really important for those portrait images to make sure that they don't grow too large. And then we also have the gutter. So that's the spacing in between each image for small, medium, and large devices. Next, let's dive into the thumbnail settings. And these are pretty simple, right? We have border color and border size and round corners. We have shadows for default and on hover. A lot of times, if you have a different shadow on hover, you can make it a really nice effect where it looks like the image is coming off the page. So here you can actually do different shadow colors, maybe increase the opacity of the shadow, and here you can increase the actual size of that shadow. Now, something I skipped over briefly for borders is we have different sizes for borders for small, medium, and large. The reason for that is depending on the size of your thumbnail, you actually might want a smaller border size. Sometimes when we have a fat border size, it doesn't look great on really small images. So if your thumbnails are going to be really small on mobile, you might want to have a smaller border size. Next up is we can have our scale on hover. So this allows you to actually make the image slightly larger when you hover over it. And then here we have our rotation settings. Now the variance has to do with the plus or minus 7 degrees. So by default right now, it is set to 7 degrees. And what that means is the image will randomly rotate from left or right plus or minus 7 degrees. Now that could be 7 or -4 or 3, right? So it'll randomly choose anything be from -7 to 7 degrees. It'll choose any number within that range to kind of randomly rotate the image. Depending on what sort of variance you want, you can actually adjust this to be as much or as little as you want in terms of the rotation variance. Or if you want to completely disable it, just set it to 0. Okay, next up is let's look at all of the modal settings. Now here it's kind of split up into 3 different groups for the modal. We have the general modal settings. We have our settings for our backdrop and settings for our navigation. Now, if we turn on captions for our modal, we actually have settings for our captions as well. So here we have the color of the caption and then our sizing for small, medium, and large, and whether or not you want to center that caption. And then for our backdrop, we control the actual color of the backdrop. Now, if you click on this, this is where you can also set the opacity of that color. So you can actually see the contents of the background of the website. And then we can adjust the blur as well. Now, if you don't want any blur, you can set that to 0 and no blur will be applied. Next up is our sizing. So the max sizing is by default 80% width and height. And what that means is the images will not go more than 80% the width of the browser and 80% the height of the browser. This is so we can both take into account landscape and portrait images. And just like our thumbnails, we have the border colors and then different sizes for small, medium, and large for your border. And lastly is our modal navigation. These are the next and previous buttons so we can navigate between our images within the lightbox. Now, the background is going to be the background color of the button. And then we also have the actual icon color. And then we have the opacity. Now, this is the default opacity when the modal opens. When you hover over that, it'll always be 1. It'll always be 100% opaque. Then we have our icon size and then our padding. So if you want to have a look, you can have different vertical and horizontal padding. And then if you want to have the icon on the inside of the image or on the outside of the image. And then lastly, you can also define custom icons. Now, by default, these are just chevron left and right. But if we look at the other demo on this page, we'll see an example of how we can actually put SVGs in here as well. So if you put in an SVG in here, you can actually still use the icon color to influence your SVG. Just make sure that you set in the tooltip, it reminds you here, just set your color inside your SVG to be current color, whether or not that is the stroke or the actual fill. You can also use SVG swatches to maintain the colors of the SVGs if you want something even more fancy. Now, it's nice that we can manage prints an entire gallery manually, right? So we can actually add our images in here, right? But what if we want to dynamically generate our galleries? This is where our integrations with something like Total CMS are a real game changer. And here is an example implementation of how we can implement prints with Total CMS 3. Inside the print stack, you'll just add in your loop gallery stack from Total CMS 3. And then inside there, you will use the prints image CMS stack. Now, this was a stack that I actually skipped over. It is in the child menu, and you'll add that inside of your CMS integrations. And the reason this stack is here is that it gives us a lot of kind of space inside the settings to put our macros. So in this example of a Total CMS 3 integration, I'm actually loading in a square image from Total CMS. So Total CMS is dynamically resizing that thumbnail and making it a square. No matter what the actual original images is, it'll actually create a square thumbnail for us with this macro. And then you can go ahead and put in the macro for the full scale image here as well. And then we use the macros for the width and height and our alt tags. Now here's an example of how we can integrate with feeds. This uses feeds files to actually watch a folder on your server, and it will process all the images on your server within that folder that you configure in the settings, and it will create a gallery for every single image within that folder. Pretty cool. And here's an example of how you can use the print stack with that, where you can basically take the macros from the feeds files and load those directly into the stack. Now, if you're using Total CMS, you don't need to worry about that. You have a wonderful interface online to manage all of that. But this is a great way as well if you want to load images in via a folder on your server. Now, Prince doesn't ship with feeds or Total CMS. These are special integrations that we've made sure that they work great. And all of these examples are, again, available within this project file that comes with Prince. So you can just copy these into your project files and they're ready to be used.